It was the second Saturday of June when 27-year-old Louisa Kendrick stood at the rail of the Fentress County livestock auction outside Jamestown, Tennessee, watching a dozen young Bourbon Red turkeys nobody in the building wanted to bid on. They were slow, rangy birds, narrow-breasted compared to the broad, thick-chested commercial broad-breasted whites filling every other pen in that barn, bred over generations for flavor and heritage character rather than the fast growth and heavy breast meat modern poultry operations demanded. The auctioneer, a wiry man named Curtis Blevins, had already run through the lot twice trying to find a single opening bid, since every serious buyer in that building was there for birds that would reach market weight in 12 weeks, not the 18 to 24 a heritage breed like Bourbon Reds needed. Louisa raised her hand at $6 a head. The laughter that followed was quiet but unmistakable. Dale Ferris, who ran the largest commercial turkey operation in that end of the county, leaned toward the man beside him and said something behind his hand that made the man's shoulders shake. Louisa heard it. She had the particular stillness of a woman who'd learned, over the past year, to let things roll past her rather than answer every one of them. She was 27, sturdy build, dark hair braided back under a ball cap, wearing a faded flannel over a work shirt, renting 9 acres outside town after moving back to Tennessee the previous fall to help care for her aging grandmother, Opal, a woman who'd raised turkeys on that same small property decades earlier before her hands got too unsteady for the work. Louisa had found the Bourbon Red listing in a farm bulletin the week before, a dozen young birds from a hobby breeder retiring out of poultry entirely, wanting them gone before winter feed costs piled up on stock he no longer had the energy to manage. She'd spent that whole spring sitting with Opal most evenings, listening to her grandmother talk about the birds she used to raise, and reading everything she could find about heritage poultry markets in her spare hours. What she'd learned was that Bourbon Reds and breeds like them, dismissed at auctions like this one purely because they grew too slowly and too small for the commercial broiler industry, had become exactly what a small but genuinely growing number of chefs and holiday customers were actively searching for. Birds raised the traditional way, with real flavor developed over a full season rather than rushed to weight in under 3 months. A commercial buyer looked at those turkeys and saw a poor return on feed cost. A chef building a Thanksgiving menu around heritage ingredients would look at the exact same birds and see exactly what a broad-breasted white could never deliver. She paid her $6 12 times over, signed the paperwork with Curtis Blevins, and loaded the birds into crates in the back of her truck while Dale Ferris watched from near the gate, arms crossed. He caught her before she pulled out. "Heritage turkeys," he said. "You know those things take twice as long to finish as a broad-breasted bird, and they'll never dress out to half the weight. You're going to feed those birds all summer and fall for a fraction of the payout." "I appreciate the concern, Dale," Louisa said, and pulled her truck out onto the county road. Word moved through Fentress County the way it always did. By the following week, at the feed store, the story of Louisa's girl paying real money for heritage turkeys nobody local wanted had made its full circuit, arriving at the conclusion that Louisa simply didn't understand the poultry business the way people who'd been in it their whole lives did. She was neither uninformed nor careless with her money. She'd already spent 2 weeks that spring calling chefs and specialty grocers across 3 counties, asking directly whether a local source of properly raised heritage turkeys would matter to their holiday planning at all. "Matter," one chef in Cookeville told her, laughing without much humor in it. "I've been driving to Nashville every November trying to source 3 or 4 heritage birds for a menu my regulars specifically request. If you can actually deliver a dozen reliably, I'll take every one." Have you ever known something true about a market that everyone around you had already decided was settled, simply because you'd bothered to ask a question nobody else thought to ask? Louisa's grandmother Opal, 82, still sharp despite her unsteady hands, walked out to the turkey run most evenings that summer, settling into a lawn chair Louisa set up for her at the fence line, watching the birds with an expression Louisa hadn't seen on her in months. "They're slow," Opal said one evening in July, watching the turkeys forage across the run, working the ground for insects the way a broad-breasted bird raised in confinement never would. "That's not a flaw, honey. That's just how a turkey's supposed to grow when you let it actually be a turkey instead of rushing it." Dale thinks I wasted the money. Dale's raising birds for a market that wants speed, Opal said, not looking away from the flock. You're raising birds for a market that wants flavor. Those aren't the same customer, and they never were, no matter how much everybody around here's forgotten that. She reached down and pulled a few weeds from around the fence post without breaking her gaze from the birds. I raised turkeys on this exact ground for 11 years before broad-breasted whites took over every hatchery catalog in the state. People forget slow used to just be normal. Louisa raised those birds through the full season the way Opal had once raised her own, letting them forage freely across the run rather than confining them purely to feed troughs, supplementing with grain, but never rushing their growth, recording weekly weights in a notebook alongside notes on foraging behavior and feather development. By September, word had reached 2 more shifts through the first one's recommendation, and by October, Louisa had a full order list for all 12 birds, holiday deliveries to 3 separate restaurants, and a specialty grocer in Cookville that wanted 4 birds for a heritage turkey promotion built entirely around locally sourced Thanksgiving centerpieces. Dale Ferris drove out to her place in early November, parking at the edge of her gravel drive and standing there a moment before he said anything. "Heard you've got every one of those turkeys sold already," he said. "That's right," Louisa said, walking over to the fence where the birds moved through the run, fully grown now, deep red bronze plumage catching the afternoon light. He was quiet, looking at the flock. "Told you those birds would never pay out like a proper broiler," he said finally. "You told me they'd never dress out to half the weight of your birds," Louisa said. "You were right about that part. Turned out weight was never what my customers were paying for. 3 chefs and a grocery store wanted flavor a broad-breasted birds never once managed to deliver, and nobody else around here was bothering to raise for that market at all." He didn't have much to say to that. He drove off, and Louisa went back to preparing that week's deliveries, Opal watching from her lawn chair at the fence, quietly satisfied in a way that had nothing to do with money at all. By the following year, Louisa had expanded to 25 Bourbon Reds, a standing relationship with 4 restaurants and the specialty grocer, and a waiting list of holiday customers who called every October hoping for a bird of their own. Opal still walked out to the run most evenings that her hands allowed, telling anyone who visited that her granddaughter had built, out of a dozen birds nobody at that auction thought were worth $6 a head, exactly the kind of small heritage operation she herself had once run on that same ground decades before broad-breasted whites convinced the whole county that slow and small meant worthless.